Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Mario Cristobal, the Miami Hurricanes continue to work their way through spring practice. In one of the constant storylines that you see coming out of spring practice, these freshmen, these early enrollee freshmen, guys that still should be seniors in high school, are starting to really emerge for Miami. And I think I want to have the conversation of, all right, what freshmen do we think have an opportunity to play a significant role for this football team immediately in 2025. I think what's so fascinating about this conversation is you go back 3 months ago, I think the consensus feeling within this Miami Hurricanes fan base, at least what y'all been dropping in the comment section, was maybe that 2025 cycle left a little bit to be desired. And it wasn't a bad class by any means, but you kind of missed out on some names that you probably wanted to add to the class. Now you fast forward to the end of March, halfway through spring practice. It sounds like this freshman class is legit for Miami in that 2025 cycle. Want to get into, one in particular surprise name, Joshua Moore, that has consistently, kind of been mentioned as a guy that is flashing during spring practice. Talk about a couple other freshmen that we haven't really talked a ton about. We've talked about Malachi Tony. We've talked about a guy like Donta Simpson, but there's a couple other freshmen that we probably haven't given enough love to that deserve some shout outs. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, the Miami Hurricane fans, one, just want to say thank you. Y'all can recognize it is such a blast for me talking this program. The amount of support y'all have been showing in the dead of winter, coming into spring, it can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear from y'all. And I know if you're a Miami Hurricane fan listening to spring practice conversations at the end of March, I know you guys have some names here. What's the freshman that you think has the biggest impact on this Miami Hurricanes football team in 2025? I'm going to mention a few names. Would love to hear from y'all as well. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start with Joshua Moore. This is a guy that, go back to his junior year, senior year stuff. This is a guy that will make some jaw-dropping catches. I mean, the physical ceiling that Joshua Moore brings to the table is about as high as any wide receiver in that 2025 class. So I wasn't all that surprised when you heard early that Joshua Moore is flashing and there are some circus catches being made and Joshua Moore's catching some eyeballs. My bigger question was, hey, can he consistently be a performer throughout spring practice? That's kind of the sense that I'm getting. Every single time you open up the spring practice notes, Joshua Moore's name is getting referenced. And so not only is he flashing, which we kind of figured he would because of, his background as a playmaker, but also the consistency. That's something that kind of stands out to me about Joshua Moore. And, the other conversation you have to have is, hey, Thursday morning was full pads. The full pads were coming on. It's one thing for these 17, 18-year-old kids to, flash in shirts and a t-shirt early in spring practice. It's a whole nother thing for these young cats to be flashing when the full pads come on. That's what stands out to me about Joshua Moore. And, Miami's looking for those big boundary X wide receivers that can work vertically. You bring in CJ Daniels, and I think we have a lot of confidence. And I would say CJ Daniels probably has the inside track at being that kind of guy. But who's the other guy in this locker room? Because you look at JoJo Trader, he's much more of a separator, dynamic after the catch. He's probably not going to be that big-bodied wide receiver that's making plays vertically down the field for you. And Joshua Moore might be second in line. And this is a guy with an extraordinary high ceiling and physically ready to step on a football field and make an impact. Keep an eye on Joshua Moore. It's been much more consistent than I expected from a guy like Joshua Moore. Now, the other name that you have to talk about, and probably my pick to have the biggest impact, is Hayden Lowe. And Gabby Urrutia from 24/7 Sports, by the way, I think he does a dynamite job covering this program. I believe he used the words most physically impressive freshman that Mario Cristobal has brought in on the defensive line. Now, on the surface, maybe we're all not all that surprised. He's a five-star guy. Well, go back 2 years ago with Ruben Bain. I mean, that was about as impressive a defensive lineman as a freshman that I've seen in college football over the last 5 years. You're telling me Hayden Lowe might be further along? I mean, if that's the case, Hayden Lowe is going to play a lot of football. And on the defensive line, even if it's just in the two deep, giving you 20 to 30 snaps a game. And what impresses me the most about Hayden Lowe, and you can go back to the senior year film, dude's really good against the run. And that's normally what takes freshmen the longest to get on the football field. You'll have some freshmen that have those athletic traits to get after the passer and be dynamic as a pass rusher. You can't get on the field if you can't play the run. And Hayden Lowe, 6'5", 250, and he is all of 250, maybe even a little bit more. Go back to his high school film too. Plays the run at a really high level. To me, from all the buzz that you're hearing, and then you go back to look at what Hayden Lowe was out of high school, then you look at what the frame is now. Look, Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor are probably your two starters out there on the edge. Hayden Lowe and a guy like Armando Blunt going into year two, that's a very exciting two deep for Miami at that edge position. Really excited about Hayden Lowe. The last name that I'll mention here is Kellum Wy, who you have to give this strength and conditioning staff a ton of credit with him. You know, when he committed to Miami, he's probably 205 pounds soaking wet. And you turn on the senior year film, he's really long, really athletic linebacker, flies sideline to sideline, but he was probably 200 pounds. And it's like, hey, we love the athlete here, but you got to get a little bit bigger if you want to play early for Miami. Well, it sounds like he's gotten bigger, and the pictures and the videos that I'm seeing from spring practice certainly back that up. He's listed at 225, certainly looks it on the football field. Miami's looking for what I would say is a difference maker at linebacker. And that's not a shot at a guy like Wesley Bissain, who I think is going to be just so dang solid for Miami. But who's going to be the difference maker? You have a guy like Bobby Pruitt. Could it be Kellum Wy? It's a hard position. It's a hard position to get on the football field early for, because it's not only just being physically ready, but there's a lot to playing linebacker that's between the ears, you know, reading and reacting and knowing the play calls, knowing the checks. If Kellum Wy can get there from what we see in the size and the athletic profile, this kid could be and one thing I will say is Corey Heatherman is elite developing linebackers. And so Kellum Wy has emerged to me as just a really exciting freshman to monitor through the rest of spring practice, especially as the pads come on. Because the biggest question you probably have with Kellum Wy is he physically ready to fire downhill, get off blocks, and be good at the point of attack? With these pads coming on, we're going to find out a lot about Kellum Wy. One name that I would just back pocket, you know, we've talked about Malachi Tony. I don't want to talk too much about him now. We've talked about Donta Simpson. Back pocket Herbert Scroggins. I don't think he's going to get on the football field this year that much, just because I think Miami's a little too deep at that edge rusher position. I really did like this kid coming out of high school, and it sounds like Miami likes him a lot too. I don't think it's going to be year one, but you just look at this 2025 class and see it feels like Miami feels like they hit on a lot of these kids. Now, the other storyline for Miami in spring practice, and I've been kind of banging the table for this, is the ceiling for Miami in 2025, to me, is largely contingent on year two development. You know, we're really excited about what we're hearing from these early and early freshmen. We're really excited about what we've heard from some of these new faces in the transfer portal, specifically in the secondary. Obviously, Carson Beck getting healthy and getting back to his form is a big storyline too, which I have a lot of confidence he will. To me, the ceiling, you know, just how good can Miami be in 2025? I think it resides in these year two players. You start at the wide receiver position, guy like JoJo Trader, a guy like Nikar. You're hearing really good things about JoJo Trader. I don't think it's crazy to say he could be the leading pass catcher for this Miami Hurricanes team in 2025. Just from, and I haven't seen it, but just from what we're hearing about JoJo Trader and how polished he is as a wide receiver. Look, we all knew he had the athletic profile to be a really good football player. Starting to come into his own as a wide receiver, that's a huge storyline. Jordan Lyle, can he be a top 10 running back in the country? Can Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle be the best running back duo in the country? I don't think that's a crazy conversation to have. How about a year two guy, Markel Bell? Now, I know he's not a year two guy in eligibility, but it's year two within this program. Great returns in terms of what Markel Bell is going to be at left tackle. And then probably maybe the biggest name is Elijah Lofton. That's a conversation that I think gets lost in the conversation that gets lost that shouldn't, is we're talking about these pass catchers. Are we good enough around Carson Beck? do not forget about Elijah Lofton at the tight end position. We've talked about it a lot during spring. Carson Beck loves to throw to the tight ends. I really think you have a stud in Elijah Lofton. And although we did not see him play a ton as a freshman, although got on the field a decent amount for a freshman at tight end, that's, I think, has a lot more to do with Elijah Royal being, sneaky one of the best tight ends in the country last year. I don't think that's like, oh, Elijah Lofton wasn't ready. It was just we had to get Elijah Royal on the field. We couldn't really take him off the field. And then on the defensive side of the football, it really starts, up front. Justin Scott, Armando Blunt. Another name that I throw in there who's, I think, back practicing is Artavius Jones, a guy that I think's huge in terms of the depth of the middle of this defensive line. We know Justin Scott's a dog. David Blais really good coming in through the portal. We know Ahmad Moten's really good. Okay, who are your fourth and fifth rotational pieces on the defensive line? To me, Artavius Jones has to be that fourth guy. Really, really important storyline for Miami to follow. Then you look at the linebacker spot. Guy like Bobby Pruitt, really excited about him. How about Damari Brown? And I know I'm kind of cheating here and just kind of throwing out some names from what I've seen here. Damari Brown, I know, is year 3. He apparently is looking the part in spring practice, and we're kind of like casting him away because of all these new faces that we have coming into the secondary, kind of headlined by Xavier Lucas. Damari Brown maybe playing a little – we'll see where he slots in. But getting a healthy Damari Brown back that kind of picks up from where he left off as a true freshman in 2023, that's another big storyline for Miami. Yeah, this is one of those teams that strikes me as, outside of the quarterback position, obviously Carson Beck's banged up. It seems like everybody else is healthy. And I'm doing a lot of other spring practice kind of readings and talking about some other teams in spring practice with like half their team banged up and not practicing. Miami seems like a relatively healthy unit in spring practice, which I think's important to note as well. We'll close it out there. I'm really intrigued by what we're hearing from a guy like Joshua Moore, and it sounds like a couple of these freshmen are going to be legit difference makers for the Miami Hurricanes in 2025. Appreciate you guys rocking with it again. Would love to hear the answer to that question. You get one name to throw out there. Who's going to be the biggest impact freshman for this football team in 2025? Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.